like the dew in the morning, gently rest upon my heart. Like the dew in the morning, gently rest upon my heart. Like the dew in the morning, gently rest upon my
everyone. Welcome to church once again. I'm glad you're here. My name is Dorothea. I'm originally from Croatia but currently living in Portugal, and I am just finishing my MA in theology at Newbold. I want to thank Pastor Lolly for inviting me here to be with you today. And the title of the sermon that I want to share with you today is Will We Be Brave Enough to Look Under Our Rugs? I think I do have to tell you that I have written this sermon before past week that we have just come out of. And this past week has been a lot. I believe that there is a lot weighing on your mind as it is in mine. I believe there is many people in your prayers as there are in mine. And I have decided I still want to share this word with you, but I want to invite you before we step into the sermon to reflect on what I'm going to share for yourself, to digest it for yourself, and to try to see how it can apply for whatever you're going through in your life and how you interact with others around you. But at the same time, I do want to say that if right now you're tired of thinking, tired of trying to figure out the world, tired of trying to figure out yourself, God, church, the Bible, or anything that I'm going to present in this sermon, I invite you to perhaps take a mental note of the thoughts, but you can also just lean into the Sabbath rest that we have right now and the fact that we are here together, standing before God, trying to listen to His voice, listen to each other, and to lean into the fact that in the next half hour, next 45 minutes, next 1 hour, and as we go out of the Sabbath, you are not alone. You are with us, and God is with us, and we are sharing His word together. I want to have a brief prayer, and then we will begin. Dear God, as we step into this moment, we invite you to be with us. We invite you to stay with us. We invite you to either open our minds or just give us the Sabbath peace and the Sabbath togetherness and the Sabbath understanding that we need right now. We need to perhaps understand what's going on around us, but perhaps we just need to rest. Please help us have this as we move on through the sermon together, but also as we move into the next week. Please bless every single individual in this church as we will listen to this sermon. Open their minds, open their hearts, and bring them more love, more joy, more peace, and more togetherness. Amen. When me and my brother were little kids, let's just say we would not really qualify for a reward for keeping our room very tidy. Our room was not very big, it was quite a narrow room, and there was just a narrow passage between the desk and the bunk bed that we would both share. And in that small room we still had a lot of toys. We would play around with the toys, and we would really like leaving them around after playing with them. So when there would come a time to tidy up our room, for us, that would be trouble. We didn't want to put as much time into tidying as we wanted to put into playing with the toys, so we tried to be smart about it. When we would have to clean, we would try to find a best way to get as many toys as we can out of sight, as quick as possible. That would mean that we would push most of them under the bottom bunk. We'd push some of them into the closet, some of them into the shelves, and the rest that wouldn't fit, we would put under the blanket that my little brother would use because it wouldn't trouble him at night. He was so sure that there was still space for toys in his bed. Our mom wouldn't, of course, be very happy about it, but we thought we were being smart. I don't know if you could say for yourself that you were a little bit better than us, or for your kids or for your grandchildren, But I think we can all agree that the way we tried to deal with the problem was not the best. In fact, it was quite bad, because in the end, there would be more work, there would be more tidying, there would be more dusting, and there would be more unhappiness. And the way we dealt with our toys reminded me of a saying that we often use to describe a similar way of dealing with more serious problems: sweeping something under the rug. The saying has two sides to its meaning: to ignore, deny, or conceal from public view or knowledge something that is embarrassing, unappealing, or damaging to one's reputation. The second meaning is to try and hide a problem or try to keep it secret instead of dealing with it. We tried to hide our toys, keep them secret. We were not dealing with our problem, but also the saying is used to describe when perhaps we hear something or see something that we are not comfortable with, embarrassed by, or that could damage our reputation, and we try to not think, talk, or do anything about it. This morning, I would like to invite you to dive into the story of Hagar, Sarah, and Abraham with me. And this story we can find in Genesis 16. I would like us to unwrap this story in a way that we perhaps try to see if there is something swept under the rug in the way we usually read and encounter this story. I'm quite sure, that we usually tell this story in a way that it reinforces a message that we should not mess with God's plans, but be faithful to Him. Be patient, and He will deliver on His promises. That is a great point, and it is really useful, but is there something more? Let's search together. Let's open our Bibles together in the beginning of chapter 16 in Genesis. By this time, we already know quite a lot about Abram and Sarai at this point. But Hagar is introduced here for the first time. Let's see what we find out about her. I will be reading from the NRSV. Genesis chapter 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. She had an Egyptian slave girl whose name was Hagar. Let's stop here for a bit. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Hagar, besides being mentioned in the Christian tradition, is also mentioned in the Islamic tradition. There she is talked about as Abraham's second wife and the matriarch of the people. In Christianity, she is not often talked about with such regard, while in Islam her name Hagar means beautiful, or the one that feeds. In Christianity, we are not even sure if the name Hagar is a personal name. There is some reason to think that Hagar simply meant a foreigner, the one that does not belong. This would make sense because she was indeed from a different nation. We get told that she was an Egyptian. Perhaps she even spoke a different language. We don't know for how long she was a slave of Sarai. The other thing that we find out about Hagar in this first verse is her status in the family. KJV refers to her as a handmaid, and NKJV is as a maidservant. But a perhaps more accurate translation for her role for the way her role is described in Hebrew is found in, for example, NIV, where she is referred to as a slave, or in NRSV as a slave girl. It is likely that she did not have a freedom to leave her mistress, as we see later when she had to flee because Sarah had the power to do with her in the way she pleased, to the extent of offering her body to Abraham, her husband. From the text, we don't see that this was done with any consent or agreement from the probably young Hagar. We do read in verse 3 that Hagar became Abraham's wife, but we also know that in her status she was lower than Sarai and still remained as Sarai's slave. We are familiar with the fact that slavery was not unusual at the time, and it was not unusual in Israel. There is many regulations for keeping slaves in the Old Testament, as some of you may know. We are also familiar with the fact that taking second or third wives was not uncommon. We have other examples of that in the Bible, but we also know that in Hammurabi's law, that was quite influential at the time. It allowed for taking servants or slaves as wives in purposes of procreation. So all of these things that we have just discussed, they seem lawful, they seem legal. So, do we move on? I'm quite reluctant in moving on because some of the things that we have just mentioned are stirring some uncomfort, some denial, some sense of some aspects of this story are not being very, very appealing to me. And we have decided not to brush those under the rug in this sermon, so we are going to address them further. So what did we just do in our brief analysis so far? We have encountered some challenging aspects in the story, and we have decided to take our "this was normal at the time" carpet and brush some feelings of discomfort in that similar situation, actually not brush them under the rug, but perhaps look into them. So let's try to look a bit more deeply into what might cause us discomfort in this story. Let's read verses 3 and the beginning of verse 4. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave girl, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife. He went in to Hagar and she conceived. I'll mention 3 things that popped out in my reading of this text and of this story. Firstly, I noticed something that we have already mentioned briefly. Hagar does not seem to have a say in this plan. This plan that involves a use of her body for the purposes of her masters. What did we read in verse 3? Sarai took Hagar, gave her, Abram went into her, took Hagar, gave. If we didn't know the context, if we were just hearing these words, who or what would we think Hagar is? A toy? A doll that can be given around? A doll that perhaps does not even have a name, but is called a foreign one. Do we see this as normal? Can we allow ourselves to just think of this as normal at the time without thinking deeper about it? Secondly, I want to focus briefly on Abraham. Abraham. He did not seem to complain much. I don't know if you can find a word or a sentence where he complains. Do you maybe think that when Sarah suggested this plan, she had a small expectation that he would say, "Oh, my dear wife, you're enough for me, even without children. Maybe that's not a good plan." Do you think I am exaggerating when imagining Abraham saying, "Oh, a young servant for me that can perhaps bear children? Why not?" Do we think of this behavior as normal? Can we say that it was normal at the time without letting ourselves feel uncomfortable? This man of God did not say no to taking a young slave as a wife, and he could. He was a faithful man and in clear conscience as far as we know. Thirdly, slavery. When we speak about slavery in the Bible or in general, how do we feel? Do we allow ourselves to feel? We believe that when we speak about slavery in the Bible, it was more regulated, perhaps more fair, if we could say that, than in the surrounding nations. But we know that there was slavery, and we know that using slaves besides for physical labor, there was using slaves for sexual purposes, and that was something that was happening at the time. So do we believe that it was normal at the time? We believe that that was normal at the time. We believe that that was regulated, that it was more regulated in the nations around Israel. But do we allow ourselves to feel horror and grief at the same time? So, see, when we let the way we understand the Bible shape, we let the way we understand the Bible shape our lives. How does our reaction to these real human experiences in the Bible shape our lives? Do we let it shape our views of slavery that is around us? Luckily, slavery is not a part of the legal system in the most countries like it was in the Bible anymore. But we know that it is still present. We know that many people come there to the UK following the promises of better jobs, of a financial stability, and find themselves working day and night, getting more and more into debt, and are not able to get out of the situation because of the fear of violence, because of the lack of a support system. We know that many young girls leave their families following promises of good jobs and providing for their families and end up being forced into prostitution, pornography, or getting trafficked. They often cannot escape for the fear of violence or because of shame. Perhaps this was different in the Bible, but do we let it make us feel uncomfortable? A young Hagar, a young foreigner. Are we allowing ourselves to brush the realness of human experience that this brings to our interpretation of the text under the rug? Or are we allowing it to influence the way we read the Bible and see the world? If we do, let's see how we continue reading this text in Genesis 16. We come to the second part of verse 4. Genesis 16:4, the second part. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Why would she look at contempt at her mistress? Why would there be contempt? Some people say it is because she became proud. She became proud because now she was pregnant and her mistress wasn't. I guess that is possible. But I wonder, why wouldn't she look at her mistress with contempt? How many of you women would fight the feeling of contempt if you had to sleep with a man that is your master to carry a child for another woman? No matter how faithful these people are, no matter how much God led them and kept them and made promises for them. One author in her interpretation of the event said the following, and I will paraphrase. Hagar was pregnant in slavery. Perhaps the child gave her a feeling of purpose. Perhaps she sang a bit louder a song of freedom. Perhaps she worked a bit slower. But what did Sarah do? And let's read verses 5 and 6. Then Sarai said to Abram, May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my slave girl to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, Your slave girl is in your power. Do to her as you please. Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she ran away from her. Sarai dealt harshly with her. Another translation says Sarai mistreated her. The same term for this harsh treatment of Hagar by Sarai is used to describe the way Israelites were treated in Egyptian slavery later. It has a connotation of humiliation, belittling, and perhaps even violence. Who could Hagar ask for help? Did anyone understand that she was probably suffering? Did we see that before? I don't want us to completely negatively view Sarah either. We could have a whole other sermon about her, but I just want to very briefly mention her to keep our story in balance. Think with me. If you have ever started to read the Bible in order, what were the most difficult places to get through? So if you read the Bible from the beginning, you started reading Bible from the beginning, what were some of the most difficult places that would probably make you get stuck or give up on reading Bible in order? I guess for me, it's mostly the generation lists. Why? Because there is a lot of them and they are very long. Believe it or not, that is one of the main things in the Old Testament, generation lists. And it's important that there is many of them and that they are very long, because they are the fulfillment of God's promise to multiply, to continue the generations and create a people who Messiah would come out of. So if this is the case in the Old Testament, what does a woman who cannot have children represent in that culture? A stop? A problem? A barrier? Who would like to be seen like that? Who would want the whole chapter that speaks about you to start with verse 1? Now, Abraham's wife Sarai couldn't bear him any children. It does not justify her treatment. It does not justify violence. But it helps put things in perspective. It makes it clearer as to why she did not have the holy patience of waiting for God's promise. It makes it clearer why she did not behave rationally in the surroundings that only ever had an expectation from her that she could not fulfill. This is not a nice and a clean story with heroes and enemies. It is a messy story full of real, human, deep experiences. It is a story of messy lives, just like ours. A story that involves injustice, impatience, pain, jealousy, violence, just like we sometimes experience. Do we sweep those experiences under the rug? Do they cause problems? Do they make us feel uncomfortable? Would we rather not talk about them? I would like us now to address this, not to address these, but briefly focus on one specific issue in our real lives. I'd like us to try and lift one of the carpets in our common lives and see if we have hid any unresolved silences, discomforts, injustices, or pain under it. And as I said in the beginning, in this moment perhaps you want to lift something else, or you don't want to lift any carpets at all, but perhaps take a note of this thought and think if you can do it when you have more strength, more patience, or more energy to think. And this week, this wind has been just so much, so I will choose this one and let you do your work yourself. This is the one that I'm sure you have heard plenty about in the past months. The issue of fight against racial injustice. A couple of months ago, one of my favorite musicals of all time, Hamilton, has come out in a movie form. Before the original cast in the theater stopped playing, they decided to get the cameras into the theater and record the whole thing and immortalize it. If you haven't heard about it, Hamilton is a hip-hop musical about American founding fathers and mothers during the time and just after the time of American Revolution. It is widely acclaimed, it has gotten many prizes throughout the years, but no matter how many prizes it got, I love it. I've listened to all the songs many times. I have watched it in London once last year, and I was supposed to watch it again in May, before Corona happened. But I still want to go again and see it, perhaps when it's safer again. And why am I telling you about this? Just like many other things in our cultures, Hamilton the musical has been put under scrutiny for not addressing the issues regarding slavery and slave trade at the time of American founding fathers and the slave trade that they were themselves involved in. It was accused of not taking that aspect of history seriously enough, of whitewashing history or sweeping things of history under the rug. Perhaps you do not know Hamilton, but I'm sure over the past months you have heard about the pleas to recognize police brutality and other violence towards Black people all over the world and in Nigeria very recently. Pleads to include Black history and facts about the last transatlantic slavery and British participation in it into the curriculum. And if not these, I'm sure you have heard about bringing down statues, or if you're on Twitter, you've probably seen a sarcastic trend, cancel culture, in protest against all of the rethinking of culture that is happening right now. I have to admit, when it came to Hamilton, at first, I did not want to deal with criticism of something that I like so much. I kind of tried to avoid the articles, the YouTube videos, afraid that my enjoyment will diminish if I hear what the people have to say. I was remembering the comfort of the time before the movie faced criticism, the comfort of all the soft and clean carpets under which the real story was hidden, that I could just walk on very gently without thinking. I am sure that some of you can relate to what I'm saying in one way or another. But it would not be fair to preach to you about listening to Hagar in this story if I would sweep these criticisms, these forgotten part of the story, these injustices under the rug. At the same time, I'm sure that some of you are celebrating that another side of the story, side of the history, of politics, of governing, of education that is being told more and more right now. A side that has historically constantly been swept away from sight, a side that was silenced, a side that included real lives and real human experiences. I am sure that some of you cry out in saying that there has been enough of treating humans like dust, like dirt. That there has been enough of not listening to the voices that cry out for justice. That there has been enough of looking at the stories of human lives, just like the story in Genesis, and not seeing the pain, not seeing the injustice, and not seeing the violence. Or it is just saying, oh, you have had enough of people just saying, oh, well, that was normal at the time, that happened in the past. It is not like that anymore. Hagar's story is one of a woman whose story, whose side has not been heard or emphasized. It is a story of a woman who was enduring violence in her trouble to the extent that she decided to run into the desert, pregnant, risking her life instead of staying with her mistress. She was dealt harshly with. She had no one to turn to. If she was here, I believe she would be tired, like many of you are tired. Tired of not being seen, tired of fighting to be seen, explaining her side of the story, how she feels every day. I want us to read on in the text. And here I will read from the New King James Version. And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. And now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to shore. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from and where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man, he shall stand against every man, and every man stand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees. For she said, Have I also here seen him who sees me? Hagar, a slave, pregnant with the child of her master, probably could not continue in her fight. She stops by the spring in the desert. There she meets an angel who tells her, what? Hagar, the Lord has heard your affliction. The Lord has heard your affliction. Hagar, the black African woman, a slave, a foreigner, mistreated, silenced, becomes the first person in the Bible to name God. She tells him, You are the God who sees, El Roy. God has heard her affliction from the beginning. God saw her from the beginning. God did not cover up her story of injustice, affliction. He did not normalize it. He did not put it under the carpet. God heard Hagar's affliction. He sees her and he blesses her. God sees you. He blesses you. He hears your affliction. He knows you. He wants to bless you, even though you might feel like your story is not heard, like your pain is not seen, like justice is not there for you. God sees now. If you need rest, rest. If you want to sing or dance or watch Netflix because it's too much to think, to figure out the world, to do any more shouting and crying, rest. God sees. It's okay if you don't want to share anymore, if you just want to continue on with your life. No, God sees. God has heard. You can stop for a second. You can rest in his arms. You can stop for a second and you can rest in his arms. You can't stop. You can allow yourself to be seen and heard by the one who sees and the one who hears. You can take this Sabbath, this gift, this rest in the arms of the one who sees. But on the other hand, I have to say again, God sees, God hears, but unfortunately, we don't do that so easily. We don't change that easily. We know that God here advises Hagar to return, and that she returns to the equally bad environment. So bad that she had to flee again later with a child for good. We perhaps have to deal with our own problems like Abraham and Sarah, trying to do God's word, and we don't see the affliction that we are perhaps causing to those around us. Maybe we are holding ourselves, maybe we are thinking about ourselves, about our own problems. We are thinking about our own comfort maintenance business so much that we don't see those around us who need to be heard. So what do? How do we become more like God towards our brothers and sisters who need to be heard, towards our neighbors? I believe we have to learn how to lift our rugs, how to see, hear, and not just find justifications for why we did not do the work earlier, but we have to try to embrace the uncomfortable. Listen to people's stories, think about their stories, cry with them, empathize with them. We are going to be uncomfortable when listening to other people's stories and experiences. We are going to try to sweep those stories under the rug. We are going to try and sweep those stories under the rug. Sometimes we have to set boundaries and care for ourselves. But sweeping things under the rug is different. And let's repeat what that means. To ignore, deny, or conceal from public view or knowledge something that is embarrassing, unappealing, or damaging to one's reputation. To hide a problem or try to keep it secret instead of dealing with it. It is easy to just cover someone with our rug of that is normal, or I don't want to know about that. But I would challenge you this morning with the idea that God calls us to get in touch with humanity, to see, not to look away, to hear, not to silence. If we want to see, we will have to embrace the uncomfortable. We will have to really practice radical love and sometimes self-sacrifice. We will have to stay with the uncomfortable to be more like God to our brothers and our sisters and our neighbors. God sees. God hears. Are we ready to do the same? Let's have a prayer. Dear God who sees, dear God who hears, we come before you again. We are ready to be seen or heard. Perhaps right now we just want to rest in your arms because we have had enough. But perhaps now is the time for us to lift the rugs that we have been covering people with, stories with, experiences with, histories with. Please bless and guide every individual in the church this morning. Bless and guide them. Help them take care of themselves through this process. Set boundaries, but also help us learn how to stay with the uncomfortable so that we can love each other and you better. We know that there is hope for more love. We know that there is hope for more acceptance. Lead us so that we can learn it. Lead us so that we can experience it. Lead us so that we can share it. We want to thank you in the name of your Son, Jesus.